to this webinar. The agenda for today is to first give you a recap on the i4Trust values and on i4Trust data spaces, and then giving you some hints for your application for the open call, and then finally we have, I think, plenty of time for a Q&A session. So first, recap on the i4Trust values and the roles in the i4Trust data spaces. Just presenting here again the i4Trust values, beginning with the trustworthiness. What does it mean? So due to the identification framework provided in i4Trust, this ensures trust among all the different participants. There is this block sovereignty, which means that i4Trust brings all the components to enforce data access and usage policies, and which empowers you for data owners or providers to be the sovereign of their data. We have this effectiveness by standardized data exchange APIs like NGS ILD. This allows you to effectively share your data. We have this box openness, meaning that the whole i4Trust is based on open standards and open source components, so you have no vendor lock-in. Then cross-domain. So with i4Trust, data can be shared among different participants in multiple domains, and this allows you to define cross-domain data value chains. Then with for instance, with the marketplace services, you have the ability to monetize your data and also to enable your multi-site markets. It allows you to create innovative business models. And due to the whole i4Trust community, which is formed by experts, it allows you to scale your business and gain stronger position in the market. Now, what's a data space? Data space is a decentralized data ecosystem built by the parties with a common purpose. Or let's define this way: it's a decentralized data ecosystem built around commonly agreed building blocks, enabling an effective and trusted sharing of data among participants. And basically, these building blocks are provided in i4Trust by Fireware and iShare, as we presented in the various trainings, and these allow you to create i4Trust data spaces. Now in this picture, you have data consumers, data providers, and identity providers and authorization registries. These form an ecosystem with a governance structure to create a basic data space. And in addition, you can add services like here marketplace services or to support a variety of use cases. Now coming to the different roles in the data space presented here. On top of the whole picture, you have the trust provider, which is needed by every data space and is required to register all the different participants and keep their status up to date. Then you have these different roles here participating in the actual data sharing. So on the one hand, the data consumer, which is some participant who consumes the data from a data provider, and for this needs to agree to the data license terms given by the providing organization, and then receives authorization to access this data. And there's a data provider, which is some participant that hosts actually the service to provide the data on behalf of a data owner next to him here, which can be a separate organization in the data space, which is actually the owner of the data. And then there's some service providers in addition. On the one hand, identity providers that are required to provide the identity of human individuals, especially for the data consumer. And these identity providers can be hosted within the environment of the consuming organization, or can be even external identity providers. And then there are these authorization registries, which allow you to store your access policies for accessing the data service, which can be also operated within the organization of the provider, or even operated as an external registry. And in addition, there might be marketplace services allowing providers to offer their services and consumers to acquire access to these services. Now, looking at i4Trust again, this picture, you can see that all participants can actually interact with each other, and this all is based on the i4Trust framework. And i4 here now providing the technology solutions for the data sharing between the consumer and provider, and also technology building blocks for the identity providers, marketplace services, and authorization registries. Okay, coming back very briefly now to our reference example we presented in the trainings, which was about this packet delivery company use case, was offering a delivery order service to certain retailers, which then allow their customers to change their delivery orders. It's this delivery service from this packet delivery company. And the idea of the showcase was to show how to these access rights for accessing these delivery orders can be delegated from an organization which acquires access to a certain human customer of their shop systems to finally access these services. And now bringing back the picture from before, now how do these different roads map to our use case? So for the trust provider, we are using the iShare satellite, and now as a data provider and data owners, the same person, let's say, this is the packet delivery company in this use case, and as data consumer, there are the organizations of these retailer shops, or more precise, even their customers. We had several identity providers in place for the different organizations, which they operated by themselves. The same applies to the authorization registries we had in place on the data provider side of the packet delivery company, but also authorization registry operated within the consuming organizations, where they stored the access policies which were delegated to their human customers. And in the middle there is the i4Trust marketplace being a participant in this data space. So this was just a recap about some basics from i4Trust and from our reference example. Now coming to the checklist, which we wanted to provide to you, to give you some hints to check before you submit your proposal, especially about your technical description. And just pointing out some questions we've listed here, which you should ask yourself when providing your description for the open call application. And first of all, first question would be, does your experiment actually fulfill the i4Trust values I presented in the beginning? So this trustworthiness, sovereignty, effectiveness, openness, cross-domain, innovation, and growth. Then important question you should ask yourself is, did you highlight in your description how you actually break data silos when incorporating now an i4Trust data space? And coming to the different roles I presented before, did you point out the mappings of your data space participants to these different i4Trust data space roles? And giving you some more precise hints here. First question could be, did you provide an architecture figure which shows where your i4Trust building blocks are deployed and when and how they are used for instance, the iShare satellite or fireware context broker technology, keyword identity providers or alternative identity providers, authorization registries, and whether there's a marketplace in place in your data space. Then also, did you explain that figure, and particularly the interaction with the different i4Trust building blocks? So for instance, how and when are there interactions with the trust provider, or namely the iShare satellite? Then in the case that you plan to also use the marketplace, what will be the offerings by the data provider on this marketplace? And then the next question, how do you manage the access policies, and which components do you actually use to manage the access based on these policies? Then who plays the actual role of the data consumer? Is it just an organization, or is it human identities? And how do they access the service? Then how do you manage identities? And are there specific access policies for certain identities in your use case? And finally, how does the actual data owner specify how its data can be used? This is just to give you some hints to be asked before submitting your proposal. Just showing also some architecture diagrams we also provided in our example documents for the open call application, displaying the different components where identity providers are placed, where prep proxy is placed, where are the different interactions, also with the iShare satellite, with authorization registries. And there was also this AI service example, which we presented in the last webinar. It's also important to display what are the actual interactions between the different components. Okay, then that's basically all we wanted to show now in this webinar. So there's now, I think, plenty of time for a Q&A now.
In the meantime, while some questions arrive, I want to underline that the description of your experiment using the template file that we provided is going to be crucial in the assessment of your application. So all the hints that that Dennis mentioned, which by the way we will plan to create this checklist that he mentioned also, so that you may have it at hand when delivering the application. It's very important that that are well covered, because otherwise your application may face the situation that it doesn't pass the threshold, and not necessarily because the experiment shows a great potential, but because you are not actually describing what how you plan to use the different i4Trust building blocks. Perhaps it's irrelevant. I don't know if there were some slides about that, Dennis, but perhaps in the chat, if we provide the link to the repo on GitHub, where you can find the description of the building blocks, and also a document you can download where there is in-depth description how the different components can be used. And this is something you have to really analyze and understand first. And this way be able to design an experiment which should incorporate in the description all these bits that would give confidence that you are planning to use, that you have understood i4Trust building blocks, and you know how to use them, and you have a first sketched plan how to use them in your experiment.
I placed the GitHub link into the chat.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Dennis.
Oh. I think it was the wrong audience. Can I send it to everyone?
No, we're not to all. Well, I understand you have. This means that the. Can someone from the audience confirm in the chat that they have found the link? I got the link.
Okay, but now it's posted for everyone.
Okay, you posted it to everyone. Mm-hmm. So this mean there are no questions. It's overall clear how you should describe your experiment. It would be nice at least to get some feedback that in that respect you don't have any particular question and things are clear. If you could write that down in the chat, would be appreciated. Otherwise, please ask, because that's why this webinar was all about. And if you don't write anything in the chat, we may start thinking that perhaps there is an issue with the tool we are using. So,
hi, Juanjo, can you hear me?
yes.
We have some typed up questions that we found. So,
Okay.
So are there any KPIs we need to set for the experiment?
One question first. Where do you see these questions? Because I cannot see them in the questions
Sure.
section.
Sure. I'll send it. I'll send it in the chat. It came out in the question pane.
In the question pane. Okay. So could you repeat the question again?
Sure. So are there any KPIs we need to set for the experiment?
Well, that would be great. You know that the experiments, well, the applications will be assessed from three different angles. One is the excellence, and this is precisely connected with how well you have make usage of the i4Trust building blocks in the design of your experiment. There is a second element that is used for assessing your team and let's say the ability for delivering based on the CVs of people involved and also the planning you propose and everything. And then there is a third one on impact, to understand how relevant the impact of the solution you will bring will be, right? So if you are referring to KPIs in terms of business KPIs about aspects about a particular business that will be improved, and therefore what KPIs you define to assess the benefits and the impact that you will achieve, that is of course great and could be very helpful for reviewing your application and getting a good scoring regarding impact. Of course, KPIs need to be credible. KPIs have to be somehow have a rationale behind. But yes, but there is no any particular KPIs in business-wise, since this is expected to be very much connected to your particular use case. If when you were asking about KPIs, you were kind of asking what is there a number of requirements that need to be fulfilled regarding usage of i4Trust building blocks, then in the guidelines for applicants, there is a clear description of what is sort to say mandatory, what is optional, and of course you need to show that you are using those components that are considered mandatory. So for instance, you need to be using NGSILD as the API for actual exchange about participants, using therefore participants sharing a common digital twin representation of the world. You need to put in place all the frameworks that have to do with identity and access management based on the combination of iShare technologies and fiber technologies. And I'm talking here about KeyRock, for instance, or alternative authorization registries you may use coming from iShare, plus the iShare satellite is a bit what Dennis described. All these are a bit the mandatory ones. Optional aspects, which of course, if you bring, will mean additional scoring, is to what extent you also consider using the marketplace services, to what extent you rely on data models that have been already defined under the Smart Data Models initiative, or you plan to contribute within that initiative. I think all of that is explained in quite detail in the guideline for applicants, so you can take a look at that. I hope I have answered your question.
Thanks, Juanjo. I've added a few more questions in the chat, so we can read those out.
Okay. Okay. Are there any APIs in the submission portal? Is it possible to edit the application after submission before the end deadline ends? I think this is more a question to be answered by you, Funding Box, but I understand it's feasible.
Yes,
as far
definitely.
as I know, that is feasible. So don't be afraid about, let's say, clicking the submit button, because still after clicking the submit button, I think you can still modify, right?
Yes, exactly. So you can submit just so you don't have to wait until the deadline to submit, and then you can continue editing your application until the submission deadline, which is exactly 2 p.m. See it on October 25.
Okay, good. So some questions about the i4Trust satellite block, and I guess that might be either Dennis or Rajib, who may answer that one.
I think that's
Yeah.
for Rajib.
Yeah, I am there. Yeah, so in the i4Trust building blocks, you can find some description about it, and the APIs that are available from the satellite block. You can find on the link that I share. I think Margareta, you might have to share it with the audience, because I'm not able to send it to everyone.
I think that if you write in the chat, I believe you can do it.
Yes, to
The
all
only
in
question is that you have to okay. So the problem is that we cannot select only to the organizers. So then you may need to forward that to all.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
Margareta did that. Thank you, Margareta.
Thank you, Margareta.
Yeah, so is there any specific question that you are looking for in terms of the satellite block? Because the idea is that this is a trust provider, and each data space will have to host a satellite. And there is an open source version coming for the node of the satellite in the coming month. Which will be published, and of course we'll share the details about that with you via the community. So keep an eye on there. Right now it's currently under testing. So once we think it is ready for release, we will release that. I hope I have answered that question.
I would take advantage to comment a few things. I mean, I share, and of course, Rajib, you may amend anything I may say, but I hopefully will explain things properly. The iShare satellite is a service that keeps tracks of parties that are participating in a data space, and keep track of who you can really trust, who have been registered as a trustful participant. Of course, this means that the kind of experiments you should bring on the table will be more meaningful if the whole notion of the need of verifying whether a party is a trusted party makes sense for the kind of problem you solve. And that means at the end of the day that you have to think about use cases where a given participant that is sharing data or consuming data might be sharing that data or consuming that data without, with the possibility of doing so for parties that they may not know a priori, right? You may have, of course, a use case where you, let's say, will test the use case with very concrete companies playing the role of users, playing the role of service providers, and so on. But in general, should be a use case where that service provider might be offering that service to, for instance, many potential consumers in a data space. You might be bringing in your consortium one particular consumer company, so because you need to test this and demonstrate that, but it should have the potential for being a service that can be consumed by many other parties, which is what justifies at the end of the day that that you need to involve a service like the iShare satellite to verify that the parties that are consuming your service are trusted parties, right? So, I mean, you have to bear in mind in the design of your experiments that the kind of experiment that fit well in an i4Trust and in general a data space environment are use cases where you are designing perhaps a service that you intend to offer to multiple consumers, or the other way around. You are offering some data that you expect there might be many potential consumer applications that want to exploit. So this is an aspect that, of course, you have to bear in mind. If you come with an experiment where essentially you are implementing something that only makes sense for the companies that you bring in the consortium and only those companies, then it's not that meaningful to, let's say, consider such a use case for data spaces. You have to come with the idea of use cases that where at the end of the day make sense to decouple consumers and producers of data, and therefore that's why the whole need for having these iShare satellite services and access control, identity management, and so on makes sense.
Thank you, Juando. Yeah, exactly. As Juando explained, that is its purpose, and on top of it, while data owners can provide authorizations to consumers, additionally they can add the license or the data license, basically, which is usage policy tags, while providing authorizations to consumers. And also, when you are providing data to a consumer, you want to verify that the consumer has already signed and become part of the same framework, trusted framework, as in within the data space, so that you know that the other party will also abide by the data license. So that also covers the legal aspect on top of what Juando just explained.
There is a question about level of support we can expect. I guess this means during the experiment development, and well, I believe that is again explained in the guideline for applicants, but in making a quick summary, when you get selected and you sign the contract that will be signed with you for giving you away the funding, the agreed funding, there will be some mentors that will be assigned to you, and that means that yes, there will be some level of technical support. It will be required that you rely on the help desk technical support that we have put in place, which means formulating questions through concrete channel, because through that channel we will get your request for help registered into Jira. Jira is a travel ticketing system we have in place within i4Trust for precisely managing this request for support, and those will be then handled by the community. They might be handled in the let's say in a first level by the DIH that might be part of your consortium, or perhaps another DIH, if the question is a general question and some DIH wish to answer. But also, at the end of the day, there will be a team of fiber experts providing you support. Support will not be just in terms of fixing bugs. When I said that you will be assigned a mentor, is because precisely that technical mentor will help you in closing the design of your experiment and making sure that you make a proper usage of i4Trust building blocks. More questions, because I think there are some statements, but this session is about questions and answers. There's one question which is, in the case we have questions later on, could you provide with an email address? I think there is an email address actually. The question is, we have to be fair with all the participants, and in general we can only provide general advice. So in that sense, you could make specific questions, that's fine, but we probably will go and answer to them in a general way, and we'll do it in the existing help desk channel within the community. So the way to go is that you send to us the question. There is space on the i4Trust community which was created for you to formulate those questions if they are generic. If they are not that generic, you may send to us an email, which is, I think, has been written in the chat actually. But as in both cases, either because the question has been formulated in the help desk within the i4Trust help desk space in the i4Trust community, or whether you have sent it through this mailing list, we will finally respond to it in the help desk space within the i4Trust community, because the rules mean that we should answer them to all, to be fair with all applicants. More questions. Question: when do you plan to submit estimate of applications, and when, in case of success, the project could start? I don't know by heart the calendar, but perhaps you, Margarita, can answer that question. If not, I can in the meantime try to rescue a calendar. Yeah, I have it in front of me, so I think this is again answered in the guideline for applicants. But anyways, telling you briefly, you know the deadline is 25th. During that same day, there will be eligibility check that will be run to make sure that all the applications that get into the evaluation period really have all the data that was required to be evaluated. There will be an evaluation period, which is expected to finish by November 12th. And at that time, you will receive, those that, let's say, have passed this first evaluation filter will be invited to selection days that will take place on November 18th and November 19th. So you should pencil in your agenda these 2 days, because if you get selected, you will be invited to a session one of these 2 days where you will be asked to make a pitch on your experiment, proposal, and so on. And there will be a jury hearing you in that selection day, and after all the experiments that have been invited to give a pitch there, up to 16 might be selected, and those 16 might be less if no enough quality is found in considering all proposals, but let's say up to 16 will be selected, and those 16 are the ones with which we will be working, trying to get all the paperwork finished and finished. So this will start, let's say, right before right after the jury day. So we'll start legal check paperwork on November 22. There will be a period until January 19th, which is the period during which we expect that all the paperwork will get finished, and there will be the signature of the super grant agreement between you and the consortium. And you should pencil in your agenda that there will be a welcome event for those experiments that have that finally signed the contract, and that would be during the summit, the FAWER summit, which is planned in the nice island of Gran Canaria. So we will have this welcome event in the Canary Islands, Las Palmas de Gran Canarias, concretely. And yeah, that would be kind of the kickoff of all the experiments. And yeah, when we will start this period of 9 months, you will have to complete the experiment. I hope it's answered the question. More questions? Yeah. So bottom line, the project would start January 19, 2022. Then there is a question: when should we expect the checklist you mentioned? When will the recording be available? I don't know, Dennis, when do you think we may have this checklist? Perhaps beginning of next week?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So we will publish a post on the community providing information about the checklist. Probably we will also update some section in the frequently asked question, giving a pointer to that document so that it can be downloaded, and probably you will also receive an email through the platform explaining that it's already available. Seems like there are some people that ask about recording of this session. I don't know, Margarita, is that being recorded?
Yes, so this is being recorded. This will probably be uploaded by tomorrow. It will be the same YouTube channel that we've uploaded all our recordings. So feel free to check that in the community. After this webinar, you'll receive an email with the post that has a link to the YouTube channel where you can check all the previous recordings.
Okay, thank you, Margarita. So someone is asking about whether what blocks are mandatory and so on, and because some people may argue that they may have their own technologies. So while i4Trust has been created to really foster the adoption of a concrete framework for creation of data spaces and based on experiments evolving it. So yes, there are a number of building blocks that are mandatory to use, and I think they are clearly listed in the guideline for applicants. So this is not about funding, to be very clear and bold in that respect. This is not about funding any project that has to do with data sharing, no matter how and with what technologies. Is about using a concrete framework, and there are mandatory components within that framework and some others that are more optional. So yeah, that would be what is recommended. If this means implementing some modifications in your architecture, yes, this might be needed. Unless you go and say, I will evolve my components to be compliant with the specs of the i4Trust building blocks. That, of course, could also work, but yeah, that may mean, depending on what component you were considering, a significant effort.
That's what I just wanted to add. For instance, when it comes to this authorization registry, of course, you don't have to use the implementation in Keyword now, for instance. This can be an own implementation, it can be an external authorization registry provider, could be even one of your components in your experiment, which actually provides the APIs for accessing an authorization registry and just provides these access policies there. But of course, it must fulfill the API specifications from iShare.
Mm-hmm. One question is it possible to consider financing an NGSI-LD implementation in the project, or are we expected to use existing platform and connectors? Well, in principle, you have a limitation of the budget and funding. this comes in the description and in the guideline of applicants. So it is not established how you will use that funding and for what. So therefore, and connecting to the comment made by Dennis, you may decide, okay, I plan to develop as part of the experiment this particular component, which is, let's say, an alternative, but still complying with the specification, an alternative of some of the open source components that that Fiverr, for instance, is, or iShare is bringing. Yeah, that might be fine, but well, this may limit what you aim to bring as a use case. So you have to, let's say, balance the question that if your experiment proposal at the end of the day is mostly focused on implementing the components of the framework, alternative components of the framework, and then you leave little budget and therefore little resources for actually creating a meaningful and nice experiments, then probably you might be in a bad shape to compete with others that are precisely proposing experiments where they are focusing all the efforts in creating a nice use case around the existing i4Trust building blocks. Of course, if one also advantage that that you or consideration you have to bear in mind is that we, the organizations in core i4Trust partners, will be providing support about the technologies they bring. So if you decide for implementing some concrete pieces of the framework, again, have to be demonstrated that are compatible and fulfilling the specs. Otherwise, you will not be able to meet the milestones of your experiment project. But for if you decide to go that path, then the technical support has to be given by yourself. So it would be, you need to be self-supported in that respect. Rajib has posted a link to specifications that and a test tool for compliance with the specifications from iShare that would apply to certain components of the i4Trust framework. But of course, there are other components like a context broker, implementing NGS-ILD, those are different specs. And there would be different means for assuring the compliance.
Yeah, so I posted that in response to one more question that we got, that you mentioned iShare and NGS-ILD compliance. How would this compliance be assessed? So of course, two aspects, just as I already put on the link for our tool for checking on the iShare specifications. So which components are using iShare specifications, either the ones that are provided under i4Trust or which you intend to develop. They all comply with this. Their compliance can be checked using this tool. And as Joan mentioned, for NGS-ILD and others, there are various means that Fiverr can check the compliance for. But this is also something that during the mentoring, we can, in the mentoring program for selected projects, our mentor will also try to assess whether you are in line with the expectation of those specifications. So you always have a regular touch point where you can always ask specific questions, or you can explain what you intend to do, which of course then our mentor would help you to determine whether that is in compliance or not. You want to add something, Juan?
No, it's okay. Let's give a few more minutes to see if there are more questions coming. Okay, then I guess we can close now. Perhaps you want to close, Margarita?
Sure. So thank you everyone again for joining. After this webinar, you'll receive an email to join the community, and also there you can see the quick links to all the resources we've provided, the sample cases, the previous recordings, and the email addresses where you can reach us. So stay tuned, and all the best to everyone preparing the application. So thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.